This house should be mine. But that's how Jake, my younger brother, chose to drop the bomb, right there at the family dinner table. Forks froze midair. The clinking of glasses went dead silent. For a second, even the hum of the refrigerator in the background felt too loud. And me? I just sat there staring at him as the weight of those words pressed down on my chest. My grandparents' house, the place that had shaped my childhood. The one thing they had left specifically for me. And now Jake was claiming it like it was some toy he could snatch away. I'm telling you, the moment was electric, like the air just split open. The table was long, polished oak, worn smooth from years of Sunday meals. Around it sat the usual crowd, my parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone chatting moments before about recipes, vacations, the weather. And then Jake leaned back in his chair, lips curled into that smug half-smile of his, and made his announcement. "I've decided," he said, loud enough to cut across every other voice. "Grandma and Grandpa's house is better off in my hands." I mean, come on. Anna doesn't even know how to manage property. My name, dragged like that, burned. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at my parents, at the elders, like it was already a done deal, like I didn't even exist. I glanced around the table waiting for someone, anyone, to shut him down, to tell him how ridiculous that was. But instead there was this awful pause, people shifting in their seats, avoiding eye contact. My mother's face was stiff, unreadable. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. That silence hit me harder than Jake's words. Inside, a storm started rising. Shock first, then disbelief. My heart pounded in my ears like it was trying to drown out the room. All I could think was, is this really happening? Did he just decide that the one place that meant everything to me now belongs to him? And what made it worse, the sheer arrogance dripping from his tone. He didn't ask, he didn't suggest, he announced, as if I was just some obstacle to brush aside. Every detail of that night carved itself into me. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread on the table, the flickering light of the candles my aunt insisted on lighting for ambiance, the sound of my cousin's phone buzzing against a plate, unanswered, and over it all Jake's voice echoing like a hammer. "The house is mine." My stomach twisted. Part of me wanted to scream, to slam my hand down on the table and call him out. But another part froze. Because if I exploded too soon, I knew it would all be turned against me. That's how it had always been. Jake, the golden boy, reckless but forgiven. Me, the one who was too emotional, too selfish, too much. So I bit my tongue. For the moment. Still, that didn't stop the questions from pounding in my head. How long had he been planning this? Was my family in on it? Did they secretly agree with him? And what was I supposed to do? Sit there and let him rewrite my grandparents' legacy? The meal dragged on, though the taste of food turned to ash in my mouth. Every bite felt forced. I barely heard the chatter that crept back in, thin and awkward. My focus stayed locked on Jake, on the way he laughed too loudly at his own jokes, basking in the attention he thought he deserved, on the way my parents didn't once look my way as if their silence was consent. The worst part? That house wasn't just bricks and wood. It was summers in the garden, the creak of the old swing on the porch, the smell of Grandpa's workshop, sawdust and varnish. It was bedtime stories whispered by Grandma as the cicadas hummed outside. That house was my anchor, the one piece of stability in a world that often felt like it was shifting under my feet. And now, with one arrogant declaration, Jake had set fire to it all. That night was supposed to be ordinary, just dinner. Instead, it became the opening act of a war I never wanted, but couldn't walk away from. A war that would test every bond, every memory, every shred of loyalty in our family. And as I sat there, forcing a smile, pushing peas around my plate, a thought curled in the back of my mind. Cold, steady, unshakable. If Jake wanted to fight for that house, he was going to get one. But not the way he expected. When I close my eyes and think about that house, the first thing that comes rushing back is the smell. Warm bread from Grandma's oven, fresh cut grass from the garden, and that faint trace of sawdust that always drifted in from Grandpa's workshop. It wasn't just a building, it was a whole world stitched together from love, tradition, and the kind of magic only a child can feel. Summers there felt endless. I'd run barefoot across the lawn until the blades of grass stained my feet green. The air shimmered with the hum of cicadas, and the sun painted the sky gold as it sank behind the trees. Grandpa's garden stretched wide, with rows of tomatoes, cucumbers, and roses that bloomed like velvet flames. He'd hand me a tiny watering can, far too small to make a real difference, but he'd wink and say, "Every drop counts, Anna. Plants feel it when you care." Inside, the kitchen was the beating heart of the house. Grandma would stand by the stove, apron tied tight around her waist, humming songs from her youth. I can still hear the rhythm of her knife on the wooden board, the clatter of spoons against pots, the way she'd press a fresh cookie into my hand before it even cooled. Sweet, buttery, melting on my tongue. No bakery has ever come close to that taste. And then there was Grandpa's workshop, a small, cluttered space tucked behind the house, filled with the scent of varnish and pine. The air was always hazy with dust motes dancing in streaks of light from the tiny window. He'd be there, hunched over his workbench, carving or sanding. The rasp of his tools was like music to me. He'd let me sit on the stool in the corner, my little legs dangling, while he taught me how wood could be shaped into anything if you were patient enough. "Life's like this," he'd say, lifting a block of wood, rough and plain. "It only becomes beautiful if you give it time." Those words sunk deep, even if I didn't fully understand them then. Evenings were softer. The whole family gathered on the porch, the old swing creaking as it swayed back and forth. Fireflies blinked in the garden, tiny lanterns dotting the darkness. Grandma's voice carried bedtime stories that curled around me like a blanket. Stories of resilience, of kindness, of choosing courage when the world pressed hard. Her voice was gentle, but the lessons were firm. I think that's why the house felt more than just walls and a roof. It was a vessel of memories, of values, of lessons carved into me long before I realized it. Every corner held echoes of laughter. Every step across those wooden floors reminded me that I belonged to something bigger, something rooted. And maybe that's why Jake's words at dinner cut so deep. Because for him, the house was just property. For me, it was blood, bone, and soul. It was the sound of Grandpa's hammer in the distance, the sight of Grandma's roses, the taste of her cinnamon rolls fresh from the oven. To lose it would have been like losing them all over again. Even now, as I sit here in New York, the city buzzing around me, I can still hear the old screen door slamming shut when I'd run outside. I can feel the warm wood of the banister under my palm, polished by years of hands sliding down it. I can see the photographs that lined the hallway, sepia faces of ancestors, framed in wood Grandpa had carved himself. They watched us grow, silently, patiently, as if guarding us. That house wasn't perfect. The roof leaked when storms came. The stairs creaked so loud you couldn't sneak anywhere unnoticed. Winters meant huddling by the fireplace, wrapped in quilts Grandma had sewn because the heater was always a little stubborn. But every flaw was part of its charm. Every imperfection made it more real, more alive. I know some people look back at childhood and see pain. I was lucky enough to look back and see love. A love that wrapped itself into the walls of that house so tightly that even years later, it's impossible to separate the two. So when Jake said the house should be mine, it wasn't just a grab for real estate. It was a theft of everything I had been given. Every drop of love, every lesson passed down in quiet moments, And that's why I couldn't let it go. Because the house wasn't just where I grew up, it was who I became. If I'm honest, that dinner table moment with Jake didn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't some sudden burst of arrogance. No, it was the product of years, decades even, of a pattern so old it had become part of the air we breathed. Favoritism. Subtle at times, blatant at others, but always there. Growing up, Jake was the golden boy, the one who needed more attention, who just had a different path. And me? I was the one told to understand, to compromise, to give in. I can still hear my mother's voice, sharp yet soft, with that practiced sweetness. Anna, don't be selfish. Jake's younger. He needs this more than you do. It started small. The bigger slice of cake, the new bike at Christmas while I got the used one from a cousin. At first, I shrugged it off, because isn't that what big sisters do? But over time, the shadows grew longer. I remember the day Dad helped Jake buy his first car. It was a beat-up sedan, but they polished it together in the driveway, laughing, talking like best friends. Meanwhile, I stood at the window, books piled high on my lap, wondering why no one had ever asked what I needed to get to college. I took the bus. I worked 2 part-time jobs, I hustled, and when I came home exhausted, I'd hear Dad say, "Don't be dramatic, Anna. You've always been the independent one. Jake just needs more support." That line, "You're the strong one," became their shield. It sounded like a compliment, but it was really permission to neglect me, to pour everything into Jake while expecting me to manage on my own. And what did Jake do with all that support? He stumbled, over and over again. The first business idea, some kind of music studio, collapsed within a year, after my parents drained their savings to help him rent a space. The second, a cafe with his friends, folded even faster. Money disappeared, debts piled up. And yet, somehow, he was always just figuring things out. I can picture it so clearly. Mom sliding an envelope of cash across the table to him, whispering, "Don't tell your sister." Dad co-signing loans Jake had no chance of paying back. And when I found out, because secrets never stay buried, guess who was labeled the jealous one? Me. Every failure of Jake's became another excuse for my parents to tighten their grip around him, as though one more bailout, one more rescue would finally set him straight. Meanwhile, my successes, graduating college, landing a job in New York, paying my own rent, were brushed aside with a nod. Expected, nothing special. The imbalance wasn't just financial, it was emotional. When Jake messed up, there was sympathy, hand-holding, forgiveness. When I struggled, there was silence, or worse, criticism. I'll never forget the time I broke down in tears after being laid off. Instead of comfort, my mother sighed, "Anna, you can't afford to be weak. Not like Jake. We count on you to have it together." So when Jake sat there at that dinner, grinning, claiming the house, why was I surprised? In his mind, the pattern was already set. He wanted something, he took it. He failed, he was forgiven. He declared, and the family fell in line. But I wasn't a child anymore. And the house wasn't a slice of cake or a hand-me-down bike. This was legacy. This was everything my grandparents had entrusted to me, because they saw me, not Jake, as the one who would honor it. The favoritism had always cut deep, but that night, it turned into something sharper. It wasn't just about fairness anymore. It was about survival, about holding on to the one thing I had been given without strings, without comparisons, without being told to step aside for Jake. The shadows of favoritism had followed me all my life. But that night, I felt them closing in, tighter than ever, and in that darkness, a quiet resolve began to take root. Because if no one else was going to protect what was mine, then I'd have to do it myself. The room was heavy with the clinking of silverware, and the low murmur of small talk, the kind of noise that usually wraps a family dinner in false warmth. My plate sat untouched in front of me, the roast cooling, the wineglass half full. And then, like a match striking dry tinder, Jake's voice cut through the hum. "I'll be moving into the house next month." Just like that. No preface, no question, no hesitation. The fork slipped from my fingers, clattering against porcelain, a sound so sharp it made everyone glance at me before looking back to him. Jake leaned back in his chair, smug, his arms crossed as though this was already settled. At first, I thought I'd misheard. Surely he couldn't mean my house. The house my grandparents had left to me in their will, in their careful handwriting, in their trust that I would cherish it. But Jake didn't blink. His eyes sparkled with the same entitlement I'd seen 1,000 times before. Only now it was magnified, inflated. "Jake," I managed, my voice tight. "What are you talking about?" He smirked, tapped his spoon against the edge of his plate like a judge banging a gavel. "The house. Grandma and Grandpa's place. It makes sense for me to have it. I need it more. You already live in New York, and honestly, you don't even use it." That word, use, made my stomach twist. As though memory could be measured in usage. I waited for someone, anyone, to correct him, to remind him of the truth. But then, in the longest few seconds of my life, I saw the slow nod of my father, the quiet agreement in my mother's eyes, and the silence of the rest of the family. Heads bowed, forks moving again, as if this decision had already been written before Jake even spoke it aloud. The air thickened. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat louder than the last. Anger, disbelief, betrayal, every emotion pressed against my chest all at once. I scanned their faces, looking for a sign of resistance, but there was nothing, not even a flicker. Jake took their silence as consent. Of course he did. He launched into details, his voice rising with excitement, painting pictures of his life in the house as though I had been erased from the narrative altogether. "I'll fix up the upstairs, maybe turn the den into a studio. It'll finally give me the fresh start I deserve. And with Mom and Dad's help, it'll be perfect." The audacity of those words nearly stole my breath. Deserve. As though his years of reckless choices, of failed ventures, of bailouts and handouts had somehow earned him the right to take what wasn't his. Inside me, something cracked. It wasn't just about a house. It was about every moment leading to this one. The years of being told to step aside, to be understanding, to carry my own weight while Jake stumbled again and again. And now, in one arrogant declaration, he wanted to take the only thing that had been entrusted to me. I didn't speak. Not yet. My voice would come later, stronger. But in that moment, as Jake basked in his imagined triumph, I felt a fire spark inside me, a fire that would not burn out quietly. Because this wasn't just Jake's declaration. It was a line drawn in the sand. And for the first time, I knew, truly knew, that if I didn't fight back, I would lose more than just a house. I would lose myself. Jake's words still hung in the air when he leaned forward, elbows on the table, and began to sketch out his vision, as though the house was already his. His voice carried that careless excitement he used whenever he was talking about some new project, projects that always started with grandeur and ended in ashes. But this time, his project wasn't a half-baked startup or a bar he couldn't afford. This time, his project was our grandparents' house, my house. He jabbed his fork in the air like an architect's pen. "First thing to go is that old kitchen. It's outdated. I'll tear down the walls, open the space up, maybe even put in one of those sleek marble islands. Imagine hosting big parties there. It'll finally feel alive instead of stuck in the past." My stomach tightened. Alive? That kitchen was the heart of our childhood. I could still see Grandma stirring her tomato sauce in the heavy copper pot, the one she refused to replace even when the handle cracked. I could still smell the warm bread she baked on Sundays, and now Jake wanted to gut it, erase it, because it didn't fit his image of modern. And he wasn't done. His hands swept wide as if unveiling a stage. The garden, God, what a waste of space. All those roses and lilacs, all that fussing with soil and pruning. I'll rip it out, pave it over. We'll have a patio with a grill, maybe a sound system, and I'll throw legendary parties there. People will finally see what that property's worth. The words hit like a slap. That garden wasn't a waste. It was where Grandma used to kneel, dirt under her fingernails, humming softly as she worked. It was where Grandpa taught me how to plant seeds, how patience could turn into blossoms. To Jake, it was just square footage waiting to be exploited. And the furniture? He grinned, shaking his head. Antiques, junk, it doesn't matter. I'll sell it all. Do you know how much collectors pay for old solid wood? That dining table alone could fetch thousands. Better to cash in now before it falls apart. However, the dining table, the one where birthdays were celebrated, where Grandpa once carved initials into the underside when he built it. The thought of it being hauled away, sold to strangers who'd never know its history, made my throat burn. I looked around the table. No one moved. My parents silent. My aunts unblinking. My cousins chewing quietly as though this wasn't a desecration being laid out before us. The clatter of cutlery carried on, mechanical, as if the conversation were about paint colors, not the destruction of a legacy. Jake reclined in his chair, smug, sipping his wine like a conqueror surveying his new territory. It's about time we stopped clinging to nostalgia. That house can finally be useful, functional, profitable. That was his bottom line. Always, not love, not memory, not roots. I wanted to shout, to stand up and slam my hands on the table. Instead, I sat there, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. My pulse throbbed in my ears. He was tearing apart my grandparents' home before my eyes, and everyone was letting him. But in the midst of the rage, something else stirred. A quiet resolve. If Jake saw the house as nothing more than a business venture, then he underestimated me. He thought silence meant surrender. He thought compliance would follow the way it always had. He was wrong, because while he bragged about tearing down walls and ripping up roses, I was already building my own plan, and mine didn't involve destruction. Mine involved protection. That night, as his brazen scheme filled the room like smoke choking out the air, I made myself a promise. He might believe he could bulldoze the past, but I wouldn't let him. Not this time. Silence has a sound. It presses against your ears, heavier than any noise. That night, sitting at the long oak table, I felt it swallowing me whole. Jake had just finished laying out his plan. Demolishing the kitchen, bulldozing the garden, selling off the furniture like scraps at a flea market. His words were still echoing in my chest, sharp as glass. And yet no one spoke. No one questioned him. The only sounds were the clinks of silverware, the scrape of knives against porcelain, the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Time itself seemed to stretch. The kind of stillness that makes you hyper-aware of every breath. My throat was tight, but I stayed quiet. I stared at my plate, though I couldn't taste a thing. The roasted chicken, the buttery potatoes, it was all dust in my mouth. Across from me, Jake lounged like he'd already won, smirking at his own brilliance. My parents sat stiff beside him, their eyes fixed anywhere but on me. That avoidance was louder than words. It was permission. My silence wasn't surrender. It was survival. But I wonder if they mistook it for weakness. Because inside me, everything was roaring. I wanted to slam my fists on the table, scream that they were wrong, that this house wasn't theirs to give away like pocket change, but the words tangled at the back of my throat. I couldn't breathe them out. Instead, I listened. Listened to the empty approval hanging in the air, to the cowardice of people who should have stood for me, or at least for the memory of the ones who built that home brick by brick. My grandparents' laughter, their voices, their warmth, they were fading under Jake's arrogant monologue, and the silence of the room felt like betrayal. I caught my reflection in the wine glass. My face was blank, almost calm, but behind my eyes a storm was building. In that stillness, I realized something important. Silence has power too. It can wound deeper than words. And sometimes it can hold secrets, plans not yet spoken, decisions waiting in the dark. They didn't know it yet. But while I sat there motionless, I was already choosing my path, already promising myself I wouldn't let him destroy what mattered. So I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, let it suffocate the room. And in that silence, I grew sharper, stronger. They thought my quiet meant I was defeated. They were wrong. It started the very next morning. My phone lit up with a stream of messages, buzzing on the nightstand like an angry wasp. At first, I thought it might be work. But when I saw the first notification, "Uncle Mark, you're being selfish, Anna," my stomach sank. I opened the thread and there it was, a cascade of words dripping with accusation. How can you stand in the way of your brother's future? That house should serve the family, not just you. Stop clinging to bricks and wood. Think about everyone else for once. One message after another, piling on like blows I hadn't braced for. By noon, my phone felt hot in my hand from all the notifications. Cousins, aunts, uncles, voices I hadn't heard from in months suddenly remembered my number. Not to ask how I was, not to care, just to demand, to corner me, to paint me as the villain in their story. I scrolled in disbelief, my fingers trembling. Each message carried the same sting. Selfish. That word burned through me. It was the same label I'd carried since childhood, the one my parents threw at me whenever I dared to want something for myself. Hearing it now, echoing from my relatives, felt like history looping, trapping me in the same suffocating script. The irony was sickening. Jake, the one who'd squandered opportunities, who'd drained my parents' support, who now schemed to dismantle the very home that held our grandparents' memories, was somehow the golden child, the dreamer who deserved a chance. And me? I was the stone wall, the heartless sister standing in his way. I remember sitting at the kitchen table that day, phone buzzing nonstop beside my untouched coffee. The room felt smaller with every vibration, like the walls were closing in. My chest tightened with the weight of their judgment. I wanted to shout back, to defend myself, to remind them that the house wasn't a prize, it was a legacy. But I knew none of them wanted to hear it, because in their eyes, I was the problem, the difficult one, the cold one. So I let the phone buzz. I let the accusations roll in, scrolling until the words blurred, my vision clouded by tears I refused to let fall. Silence had been my shield at dinner, but now silence felt like quicksand. Their voices filled the void, shaping a narrative that erased me. Yet deep inside, beneath the sting and the loneliness, something else stirred. A question. Why does everyone expect me to bend? Why is it always my job to give in? The pressure from my relatives wasn't just about the house. It was about control, about keeping me in the role I'd been cast in since I was a girl, the quiet one, the compliant one, the one who would swallow her hurt so others could take what they wanted. But this time, as my phone kept buzzing, I felt a crack in that role, a refusal, still small, but growing. They thought their words would break me. Instead, they were forging something else. Resolve. And as the day stretched into evening, one truth crystallized in my mind. I might have been silent at dinner, but silence doesn't last forever. When the messages from relatives became too much, I turned off my phone. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was a doorway. It pulled me back into the very heart of what this fight was about, my grandparents and the home they left behind. I closed my eyes, and instantly I was a child again, running barefoot across the wooden floors, the boards creaking like an old song that only belonged to us. I could almost smell it still, the faint sweetness of Grandma's cinnamon rolls cooling on the windowsill, the sharp tang of Grandpa's varnish from the workshop out back. The house was alive, breathing with memories stitched together with love. Summer mornings were the best. The garden would be drenched in light, and Grandpa would hand me a little tin pail for blackberries. "Don't eat them all before you get back," he'd tease, knowing full well I'd return with purple-stained fingers and lips. Grandma would shake her head, pretending to scold, but she'd laugh every time. That laughter, gentle and ringing, still echoes in the corners of my mind. The workshop was Grandpa's kingdom. The smell of sawdust clung to everything, his clothes, his hands, even the air itself. I'd sit on a stool, swinging my legs, watching him shape raw wood into something lasting. A chair, a toy, a shelf. He always said the same thing. "It's not about the wood, Anna. It's about the hands that touch it. What you make should outlive you, not in size or price, but in meaning." And at the time, I didn't understand. Now I feel the weight of every word. Grandma was the heart, though. She had this way of making even the smallest moments sacred. Tea in mismatched cups, stories told by candlelight during storms, her hand smoothing my hair when I was scared. Once, when I was maybe 8, I asked her, "What will happen to the house when you and Grandpa are gone?" She smiled, that patient smile of hers, and said, "The walls will stand, but Anna, remember, the house isn't the treasure. The treasure is knowing who you are when the walls fall down." That sentence has haunted me ever since. Back then it sounded mysterious. Now it feels like prophecy. Because what Jake sees is only walls and floors, a property, a prize. But I see the blackberry stains, the sawdust that glittered in shafts of sunlight, the stories by candlelight. I see my grandparents' love woven into every fiber of the place. And beyond that, I see the lesson they left me. Home isn't about ownership. It's about truth. About living aligned with the values they raised me with. I remember the last Christmas we spent together before Grandpa passed. We sat by the fire and he leaned close, his voice rough but steady. "Anna, people will try to take things from you. Sometimes it'll be money, sometimes it'll be time, sometimes it'll be your spirit. Don't let them. A house, a name, even a legacy, it only matters if you protect what's inside you first." Those words, they live in me, and maybe that's the real inheritance. Not the house itself, but the courage to stand my ground, to honor what they stood for. As I sat there, eyes closed, breathing in those memories, I realized something. The relatives calling me selfish? They didn't know these moments. They didn't sit in the workshop, or taste blackberries straight from the vine, or hear Grandma's whispered wisdom in the quiet of night. How could they understand? And Jake, he never listened. He always wanted more, always reaching for the shiny prize, never caring for the roots. But I did. I carry them. I am them. I opened my eyes then, and the room felt lighter. For the first time in days, the knot in my chest loosened. Because I understood, the fight over the house wasn't really about the house at all. It was about whether I would abandon myself, or whether I would honor the true legacy my grandparents entrusted to me. And I knew the answer. They could call me selfish, cruel, stubborn. Let them. Because Grandma and Grandpa had already shown me the truth. Love isn't in the walls. It's in the strength to live by your own heart, no matter who tries to silence it. That was their gift. That was the real inheritance, and I wasn't about to give it up. It was supposed to be just another tense dinner. I had learned how to keep my head down, how to let their words slide off me like rain. But that night, everything shifted. Jake leaned back in his chair, smirking. His fork clinked against his plate as he spoke, every word sharpened like a knife. "You know, Anna," he said, "it's kind of pathetic, really. You holding onto that house as if it makes you someone. It's just a building. You should be grateful I'm willing to take it off your hands." The room went still. My breath caught in my throat. I felt heat rise up my neck, but I forced myself not to move, not to flinch. He wasn't finished. "You were never the generous one," he continued, swirling his glass of wine, his voice dripping with mockery. "You've always been selfish. Grandpa spoiled you with that house, and now you're proving everyone right by hoarding it. Honestly, I'm surprised you haven't already signed it over. What are you waiting for? A medal?" A few chuckles from the table, small, uneasy, but they sliced through me all the same. I scanned their faces. My parents didn't even look at me. My mother's gaze was fixed on her napkin. My father kept sipping his drink. And my relatives? They just sat there, silent, complicit. Then my father finally spoke, his tone calm but commanding, as if the verdict had already been made. "Anna," he said, "enough is enough. We've talked about this. It's time to stop being difficult and do the right thing. Just sign the papers. Let Jake use the house for now. It's still yours technically, but he needs it more than you. Let Jake use the house." Those words hammered into me, as if the home my grandparents entrusted to me was nothing more than a toy to be passed around. As if my voice, my rights, my heart meant nothing in the face of their expectations. I looked at them, all of them, and for a moment the room blurred. The clatter of cutlery, the faint hum of conversation from nearby tables, even the clink of glasses, all faded into a dull roar in my ears. Inside me, something snapped. It wasn't loud, not on the outside. I didn't slam the table or raise my voice. But deep in my chest, a thread I'd been holding onto all my life finally broke. Years of being told I was selfish, years of being asked to step aside, to sacrifice, to silence myself for the sake of, quote, family. Years of watching Jake stumble and demand, and watching everyone rush to cushion his fall while I stood alone. And now, here they were, asking me to surrender the last piece of my grandparents I had left. I pressed my hands together under the table so no one would see them shake. My nails dug into my palms. I forced myself to breathe, even as anger and disbelief surged like a storm inside me. This was the moment when everything they thought they knew about me, the quiet one, the compliant one, was about to unravel. I raised my eyes to Jake. He was smirking as if he'd already won. My parents stared at me expectantly, waiting for me to fold. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. And in that silence, I realized this was the last straw, the moment that changed everything. Because I wasn't going to sign anything, not now, not ever. I could feel my heartbeat hammering in my ears, steady, defiant. The table was waiting for me to break. My brother's grins stretched wider. My parents leaned forward, already sure of the outcome. They thought I was cornered. They thought I had no choice. But they didn't know. They had no idea what I'd already done. I reached into my bag. Slowly, deliberately. The sound of the zipper opening was soft, but in that silence, it felt like a thunderclap. All eyes shifted toward me. I placed a thick envelope on the table, cream paper, heavy, formal. Jake's smirk faltered. "What's that?" he asked, his voice trying to stay casual but already betraying a crack. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I slid the envelope toward the center of the table. My fingers lingered for a moment on its edge, savoring the weight of the truth about to be unleashed. Then I let go. "Since you're all so concerned about the house," I said, my voice steady, calm in a way that surprised even me, "there's something you should know." I flipped the flap open and pulled out the papers. The rustle of crisp pages echoed, louder than the clinking glasses, louder than the shallow breaths around me. I spread the documents out flat, letting the black ink and stamped seals speak before I even did. Jake leaned in, frowning. My father adjusted his glasses. My mother's lips parted, as if her breath caught halfway. "The house," I said, looking directly at Jake, "isn't mine anymore." The words struck like lightning. My mother gasped. Jake's chair scraped violently against the floor as he shot upright. "What do you mean it's not yours anymore?" His voice cracked, sharp, incredulous. I let the silence draw out just long enough, then delivered it clean. "I sold it last week for $1 million. The world seemed to stop. Forks froze midair. Conversations from other tables faded, as though the entire restaurant had tuned in to this moment. My father's face turned pale, then red. "You what? You can't just—" But I cut him off. I could, and I did, because it was mine to decide, and I was done waiting for anyone else's approval. I pointed to the contract spread out before them, my finger tapping the notary seal, the signature, the date, proof irrefutable. Jake's voice rose, desperate. "You're lying. You wouldn't dare." I shoved the final page toward him. "Take a look, dare. I already did." He scanned the papers with trembling hands, his eyes darting frantically across the text. The color drained from his face, his arrogance gone. My mother shook her head slowly, whispering, "How could you? How could you do this to your family?" I met her eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't shrink back. "No. How could you do this to me? You all tried to strip away what Grandpa and Grandma left me. You wanted to reduce their legacy to bricks and land, something Jake could claim and ruin, but I pressed my hand against my chest. I remembered what they told me, that it's not about the walls. It's about living true to yourself. That's the real inheritance. So yes, I sold it. I chose freedom over chains. The air grew heavy with disbelief. My father slammed his hand on the table, rattling glasses. $1 million! Who would even pay that for— I cut him short again. Someone who values it. Someone who doesn't see it as a pawn in a family power game. Someone who won't tear it apart just to feed their ego. Jake's face twisted, rage boiling just under his skin. "You betrayed us. You betrayed me." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. For once, I felt the power shift. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling to defend myself. "No, Jake," I said softly but firmly. "You betrayed yourself, over and over again, and now there's nothing left for you to take from me." The silence that followed was deafening. No one laughed, no one clapped. Just the sound of Jake's ragged breathing, my mother's quiet sobs, and my father staring blankly at the papers as though trying to will them into something else, and me, sitting there, steady, unbroken. The secret I had carried for days now out in the open, gleaming like a blade in the candlelight. For the first time in my life, I had turned the table, and it felt good. The moment the last word left my mouth, chaos erupted. It was like striking a match in a room soaked with gasoline. Jake was the first to explode. He shoved his chair back so hard it screeched against the floor, his face twisting red, almost purple. "You sold it?" he shouted, spit flying from his lips. "You selfish witch! You ruined everything!" His fists slammed the table, rattling the silverware, making the glasses tremble as if they shared the same fear I refused to show. My father's voice cut through the uproar, low but seething, carrying the weight of decades of authority. "Do you realize what you've done, Anna? This is betrayal, against your own blood." His hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. He wouldn't look me in the eye, not once. My mother pressed her fingers to her temples as though she could massage the truth away. Her voice trembled between sobs. "How could you go behind our backs like this? After everything we've done for you? You stab us in the heart like this? To us, to your brother?" But it wasn't pain in her tone. It was accusation, a dagger wrapped in tears. Jake leaned forward, his finger stabbing the air in my direction. "This isn't over. You think you're smart, don't you? Selling it like you're some big shot? Well, guess what? I'll take you to court. I'll fight this. That house should have been mine, and everyone knows it." The irony of his words stung, but also made me laugh inside. Everyone knows it. As though repetition could transform a lie into truth. I stayed still, my hands folded calmly in my lap, while inside my chest my heart raced. Not from fear, but from release. Finally their masks were off. Finally the truth of their greed spilled out where even they couldn't deny it. The shouting swelled, overlapping like crashing waves, my father pacing, muttering about disgrace, my mother clutching her pearls of imagined betrayal, Jake's voice breaking as his rage spiraled, each word less coherent than the last. The restaurant had gone silent around us. Diners leaned, whispered, stared. The embarrassment they thought they could shame me with was now theirs to carry. And then came the final blow. My father looked at me, his jaw tight, his voice like iron. "If you think you're still part of this family after this stunt, you're mistaken. Don't come asking us for help again. Don't expect us to welcome you under our roof. You've made your choice, Anna. You are on your own." My mother turned her face away, as if I were a stranger. She didn't say the words, but her silence was louder than any scream. Jake, breathing hard, his face drenched in sweat, hissed, "Enjoy your money! You'll choke on it!" Then he stormed out, his footsteps pounding like thunder, fading into the night. I sat there, still as stone, watching their anger boil over. And though my heart ached at their words, another feeling rose stronger: liberation. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking, apologizing, surrendering. I had taken control. And no fury, no curse, no severed tie could strip that away from me. The night ended in fragments. Angry voices, slammed doors, the cold distance of people who once called themselves my family. But I walked out into the night air with a strange calm. The storm had passed, and I was still standing. When the dust finally settled and the last echoes of my family's anger faded into silence, I woke up one morning and realized I was free. It didn't feel triumphant at first. It felt empty, like stepping out of a burning house into the night air. You're safe, but all you can smell is smoke clinging to your skin. I remember sitting by the window of my small apartment, the city waking up beneath me. Horns honking, people rushing, coffee carts steaming on the corners. And I thought, this is my new beginning. But what do I do with it? For so long, the house had been the anchor, the battlefield, the wound. Selling it wasn't just a transaction, it was cutting the cord. Now I had money in the bank. But more than that, I had space. Space to breathe, space to choose. That was when the idea started whispering to me. A business. Not the kind Jake dreamed up and burned to ashes. Something small, something steady. Real estate. But not about greed or grabbing, about rebuilding, about roots. My grandparents had taught me that homes weren't about bricks and beams. They were about life, about love. Why not carry that lesson forward? So I did. The first few weeks were chaos in their own way. Paperwork stacked high on my desk, nights staring at spreadsheets until my eyes blurred. Phone calls where my voice trembled because I wasn't sure anyone would take me seriously. But I pushed through. Every time doubt crept in, I thought of my grandmother's garden, the way she planted seeds with patience, knowing it would take time for them to bloom. That image kept me steady. I used part of the money from the sale to buy a small office space. Nothing glamorous, just a sunlit room above a bakery in Brooklyn. The smell of fresh bread drifted up every morning, reminding me that small things, consistent things, could carry you far. I hired 2 people, both women who, like me, were starting over. One had left a marriage where she was never allowed to dream. The other had been laid off after giving 20 years to a company that replaced her without a second thought. We became a team. We became a family of our own making. Clients came slowly at first. Young couples searching for their first apartment, an old man who wanted to sell his house but worried no one would treat it with care. I listened. Really listened. I walked through each space as if it carried a heartbeat. I wasn't just selling walls. I was helping people step into chapters of their lives. And for the first time in years, I felt useful. I felt proud. But it wasn't just about work. I finally gave myself permission to build a life outside of survival. I bought a small condo for myself, modest but bright. I painted the walls soft cream and filled the shelves with books I never had time to read before. In the corner, I placed a rocking chair, the same style my grandfather used to sit in. I would sip tea at night, looking out over the city, and feel a quiet kind of peace settle over me. And then there was the garden. I carved out a piece of land in a community space not far from my apartment. At first, it was nothing but weeds and dry soil, but I dug, I planted roses, lilies, tulips, flowers my grandmother once grew in her backyard. I knelt in the dirt with the sun on my back and felt her hands guiding mine, just like when I was a little girl. Neighbors would stop by, curious, and soon they were helping too. We laughed, we shared stories, we grew something beautiful together. Standing there one evening, hands stained with soil, I realized this was my inheritance. Not the house, not the fight, not the guilt, but the ability to take something broken and coax life back into it. To create beauty where there had been only emptiness. Freedom didn't mean being alone, it meant building differently, on my own terms. Looking back, I see now that losing my family in that moment gave me the chance to find myself, to start again, stronger, clearer, lighter. And though the pain lingers like a scar that aches when the weather shifts, I wouldn't trade this journey for anything. Because this is the life my grandparents wanted for me. Not chained to old walls, not silenced at a dinner table, but alive, rooted, blooming. It didn't take long before the news reached me. Jake had fallen again. Another business venture, another grand promise, another spectacular failure. This time it was a bar he swore would change the nightlife scene in Queens. He borrowed money, God knows from where, And within 6 months, the doors were shut, the windows boarded, and the debts piled higher than before. I saw it coming. Everyone did. His patterns were carved deep, like grooves on a broken record. Always the big talk, the endless confidence, the certainty that this time things would be different. But they never were, and each crash seemed harder than the last. He showed up at my office one evening. I remember the way he looked. Shoulders slumped, suit jacket wrinkled, eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't storm in with arrogance like before. He crept in, quiet, almost humble. Almost. "Anna," he started, his voice rough. I need a little help, just until I get back on my feet. You've got the money now. You can afford it." "Anna." I stared at him across my desk, the hum of the city outside filling the silence between us. And in that moment, I saw the loop so clearly. The same plea he had made to my parents 100 times, the same plea he made to me at dinner when he claimed the house, the same plea he would keep making over and over until someone cut the cord. "No," I said softly but firmly. Just one word, but it carried the weight of years. His face twisted, first in disbelief, then in anger. "You're really going to sit there in your fancy office with your new life and leave me to drown? What kind of sister does that?" And that's when it hit me. He didn't see me. He never had. To Jake, I wasn't Anna. I was just a resource, a safety net, a backup plan, and he couldn't comprehend a world where I chose myself over his endless chaos. He left, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. But I didn't chase him. I didn't cry. I sat there, breathing, slow, steady, because I knew if I gave in, I'd be pulled back into his spiral, his endless cycle of destruction. Weeks later, I heard he was deeper in debt, that he'd borrowed from the wrong people, that he was begging anyone who'd listen for another chance, another dollar, another miracle. And as much as it hurt to watch my brother unravel, I also knew some lessons can't be taught by saving. They can only be learned by falling. I had made my choice. For the first time in my life, I stepped out of his loop and refused to be dragged under. And though it left me heavy with sorrow, it also left me free. It's strange how silence can be louder than shouting. For weeks after the explosion at the dinner table, after the contract was revealed, after Jake's fury boiled over, my parents barely spoke to me. Calls stopped. Holidays came and went without invitations. It felt like I had been erased, cut out of the family photo. But slowly, cracks began to show. My mother's voice softened first. She left me a voicemail one Sunday morning, her tone quieter than I'd ever heard. "Anna, I've been thinking. Maybe we didn't see things clearly." Just that. A small sentence, but it carried years of weight. I knew what she meant. For so long they had defended Jake, shielded him. They called it love, but in truth it was blindness. A blindness that had left me standing in the shadows, always asked to give more, always told to understand, to sacrifice, to bend. When we finally met, I saw it in their faces. The lines etched deeper, not just from age, but from regret. My father couldn't meet my eyes at first. He stirred his coffee over and over, the spoon clinking against the cup like a nervous drum. My mother reached across the table, her hand trembling. "We thought we were helping him," she whispered, "all these years. We thought if we carried him long enough, he would learn to walk. But we see now, we only taught him to fall harder." Her words cut deep, but not in a cruel way. They cut because I knew they were true. They were realizing, perhaps too late, that love without accountability is not love at all. It's permission to self-destruct. And then came the hardest part. My father finally looked up, his eyes wet, red-rimmed. "We failed you, Anna. We failed you by not protecting what was yours, by not standing beside you. We let Jake consume everything, even you, and we're sorry." I had waited my whole life to hear those words. Not because I needed them to validate me. I had already learned to stand on my own. But because a part of me still longed for recognition, for fairness, for proof that I wasn't invisible in my own family. That night, as we sat together in that little diner, something shifted. They asked me questions about my new business, and this time they actually listened. They didn't compare me to Jake. They didn't diminish what I had built. For the first time, I felt like their daughter, not just the responsible one holding everything together. The change didn't happen overnight. Old habits die hard. There were still moments when my father's voice slipped back into old patterns, when he spoke of Jake with a mixture of pity and denial. But each time, he caught himself. He paused. And slowly, a new rhythm began. I realized something then. Sometimes parents don't change because they don't love you. They change because they finally see the consequences of their choices laid bare. They saw Jake drowning. They saw me walking away. And in that contrast, they finally understood. It wasn't a perfect ending. Families rarely get those. But it was a beginning. A slow, halting, fragile beginning. And maybe that was enough. There was a time when I thought saying no made me selfish. That refusing meant I was ungrateful, unloving, maybe even cruel. But standing where I am now, I see it so clearly. No was the first word that gave me back my life. For years, I bent myself into silence. I swallowed every slight, every demand, every guilt trip disguised as family duty. I told myself love meant sacrifice, and sacrifice meant surrender. But do you know what happens when you keep surrendering? You disappear. That night, when Jake sneered and my parents slid the papers across the table, they weren't just asking me to give up the house. They were asking me to erase myself one last time. And I almost did. Almost. But the contract in my bag wasn't just ink on paper. It was proof that I had finally chosen me. Saying no that night wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing Jake or wounding my parents. It was about breaking a chain that had bound me since childhood, whispering that I had to earn my place by giving more, by shrinking smaller, by being less than I was. And when I finally broke it, when I looked into their stunned faces and let silence speak louder than excuses, I felt it. Freedom. Raw, terrifying, beautiful freedom. Because here's the truth. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's control. It's consumption. And my grandparents, the only people who ever saw me for who I was, had already taught me the opposite. They told me once, sitting in that garden filled with violets, that the strongest kind of love is the love you give yourself first. That's the legacy. Not bricks, not walls, not a house falling apart from years of neglect, but strength, the courage to stand, to walk away, to say, this ends here. When I chose no, I didn't lose a family. I lost illusions, and in return, I gained myself. So if you're listening, if you've ever been the one always told to give more, to stay quiet, to carry the weight of everyone else's failures, let me tell you this, you don't have to. You are not selfish for drawing a line. You are not cruel for protecting your heart. And you are not ungrateful for refusing to bleed just to keep someone else warm. Sometimes the bravest word you will ever speak is the smallest. Just 2 letters. No. And in that no, you'll find your yes. Yes to freedom. Yes to peace. Yes to becoming whole again. That is my inheritance. Not the house, not the fight, but the strength to claim my own life. And if my story means something to you, if you've ever longed for the courage to say no, then I want you to remember this. You are allowed. You are worthy. And when the moment comes, don't whisper it. Don't hesitate. Say it loud enough that the walls themselves remember. Say it, no, and then watch how everything changes.